The 19th century announces the death of God. Do we not still have God? Do we not still have religion? People still go to church, to temples. People even appeal to God in political terms. So, why does the 19th century speak to us of the death of God? What is meant by the death of God? The death of God signals the end of an old God, the abandonment of an old God, and his replacement with a new God. And the new God here is understood to be a fake God. Now, the old God. The old God was God the Father, supreme authority, boundary of human consciousness. Rudolf Otto once wrote Das Heilige, the sacred, decrying the alienation of modern man from the sacred. Most dangerous God. God is no longer dangerous for us. We choose whether we want to believe something or not, whether we want to return to a tradition. The very understanding, the very notion of a return to tradition is subjective, right? Supposed to be an individual's choice, right? I choose because I am in difficulty, so to stay safe, I go back to God because it's a dangerous world, as I'm in danger of losing myself, right? So it's a safety net. And God is safe. God is about my feeling of God, not the ultimate boundary of feelings, but the ultimate feeling. Now, we could see here why the 19th century speaks of the death of God. There's nothing to believe, ultimately, that can bring into question, that must bring into question our own feelings, our own consciousness, our own sense of certainty as egos, as selves. Myself, my higher self. What greater thing than that, than my higher self? Even God becomes a metaphor for my higher self, my enlightened self. Aufklärung would cry out Immanuel Kant in the 1700s, speaking of the enlightened man. Enlightenment. We are enlightened because we realize that all of our thoughts are mediated by certain structures of consciousness. Later we could also say by certain historical forces. So we're going to study all of these mechanisms that influence us. We're going to master these mechanisms, and thereby we will come to a perfect understanding, supreme understanding, potentially, of all of the contents of consciousness, including, especially, God. God as a content of consciousness, if not as a metaphor for our very consciousness, the consciousness of the enlightened man. The enlightened man is the real God. And this is where we stand today. Now, when we master the mechanisms that influence us, what are we doing? Well, we need a method to master them. This method is essentially today technology. We are empowered by technology to master the forces that influence us. Once we master them, we can be our own masters. We can define ourselves. We can be our own creators. This is the result of the death of God. God as ultimate, supreme boundary of human consciousness. Not the material forces that are at play, the mechanical forces that can then tell us that, you know what, ultimately, it is God who places us here amidst these forces, these mechanical forces, this mechanical universe, so that we may master this universe, understand it, its complexities, and then recognize, God is great. God is great. What God? Not the old God. No. The old God did not go hand in hand with the mechanistic universe that we accept. So what about this old God who died, whose death was proclaimed in the 19th century? Leopardi, Giacomo Leopardi, a prophet of the 19th century, who happened to live in the 19th century, wrote a poem, composition, a testament, a testimony of truth, to truth, called Il pensiero dominante, the dominant thought. And in this, he was a Renaissance man. Dante Alighieri, one of his teachers from the 1300s, had addressed this problem. The whole classical tradition had addressed this problem. God as ultimate boundary of human consciousness. Also as perfection, thereby, of human consciousness. As absolute, infinite perfection of human consciousness. The last stanza of Leopardi's composition reads thus. Well, here we'll have a good translation of the Italian poem. He says, "Since I first saw you, were you not of every serious care of mine ultimate object? What parcel of a day has passed that I failed to think of you? How many times did mine dreams lack your sovereign image? O beauty as a dream, angelic semblance in earthly dwelling, amidst the lofty ways of the universe entire. What pray I ever? What hope have I? What other vision than of thine supernal eyes? What other sweeter thought beheld than thine?" Now, there is a tinge of irony in Leopardi's addressing this supreme thought, the dominant thought. The dominant thought is this overarching authority. And this is quite classical. For Leopardi, the ultimate thought is a boundary between ultimate reality and our dream world, between the content of human consciousness and what is beyond, altogether beyond human consciousness. So we could say that the content of human consciousness is a dream, and the boundary of that dream is the thought of God. Now, the thought of God is kind of poetic form that helps us convert from the dream to reality. And this suggests that it is the poet who addresses that thought. Now, a poet who is authoritative, you could say, is a theologian, a priest, but a prophet, of course, who speaks of what is ultimately hidden to human consciousness. So we have access through a poetic language to what is altogether beyond human consciousness, human certainties, feelings. So, as men, we are called to live poetically, falling short of being poets altogether, thus of perfecting the art of being a child, for children are by nature poets. We are to listen to the poets and expose ourselves thereby to what is this ultimate danger. God as all that transcends the contents of human consciousness. God the Father. But we have rejected God the Father and replaced God the Father with domesticated fetish. Something that is at home in human certainty. Something that helps us fuel, empower this sense of certainty. When's the question? What for? Where are we going with this? And usually today the end game is self-expression and self-determination and this creativity in the face of the death of God, of the old God. And ultimately this involves conflict of all of these people who are supposed to be enlightened selves, who are asserting themselves, their sense of certainty, among each other. And this conflict, of course, is managed by the machine that has helped us reach this point. The machine without which we would have to revert to our old selves, the selves that stand under the old God.